Gareth Soloway, Chief Market Strategist and CFO of InTheMoneyStocks.com, returns today to talk about silver and what the candlesticks and news are telling us about silver. This and more on this week's episode of Metal Money. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira. Gareth Soloway, welcome back to Metal Money. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing very well, Patrick. Thank you so much for having me back.
Thank you for coming on once again. You're a regular returning guest here. We appreciate that. Gareth, gold and silver have been making both higher highs and higher lows since March of this year. How positive is this development for prices in the near term?
Near term, it's pretty positive. So I still think near term and longer term, you're looking at further upside. I even think that the fall in Bitcoin recently, where we've seen Bitcoin go from 65,000 down to about 47,000, it's bouncing back in the low 50s. But even that's a positive development for gold and silver, because you will see some money being taken out of there because of the risk of a bubble collapse and finding its way to things like gold and silver, which haven't had the same type of meteoric run. So near term, I like it. Long term, gold and silver look really good as well.
Yeah, we've seen Bitcoin bounce back pretty nicely there. I remember a time when Bitcoin would go down 15-20% before it would
The
bounce
only
back.
thing I would say about that is don't don't underestimate when Bitcoin will collapse, because historically over the course of Bitcoin's existence, 50% retraces are very common, and I actually do expect that for Bitcoin again. I don't think all of a sudden we're in this new world where you're going to just see 10 or 15 or 20% pullbacks. So be ready for that, and then be buyers of it. In all fairness, be buyers of it when it gets down that much.
Past guest Nick Santiago said back in October last year that precious metals would base before moving higher. And again, he said this back in October of 2020, and as unpopular as it was, Nick does look to have been right. How much longer do you expect precious metals to base before moving higher?
I think the move is coming in the second half of this year. And in fact, let me show my chart up here of the SLV here so everyone can kind of get a general sense of it. But you can see Nick was dead on. I mean, basically you had the run up on the SLV here, and then from that high pivot, you made a low in just before October, and you've gone sideways for the last, really 6 months plus now. So he was dead on that call. But you can also see, for those of you that are more on the technical side of trading, that this is a perfect bullish pattern of consolidation. So while it's basing here, it's getting ready to break out to the upside. And you can see that again, anytime you make a big move up like this and then you stay in the upper 30% or so of the range, that is a bullish pattern. And you're going to look for a breakout when it reignites, when it gets above this trend line here. All right. Once that happens, you're going to see a silver rip to the upside. Quickly looking at the GLD as well, much the same type of pattern formation. It's a little bit more to the downside, but it's still inside of this big move up. And you're basically looking for this trend line to bust out, and you'll easily go back to the short-term highs on gold and then even higher. One thing I wanted to just show your viewers here, which I think is so fascinating, is this chart on gold. Now, this is a chart on gold going back to 1979, 1978. And you can see that you had your all-time high back then on gold here in 78, 79.80, I guess it was. And then you recently, or I should say in 2006, 7, you broke above that pivot high, and you did a classic retrace of a 382 Fibonacci retrace. So again, Fibonacci 382 retrace before breaking and having this monster breakout on gold to the
Wow.
upside. And then what you can see here, and this is so fascinating, is that if you look at the high here and this breakout we had recently back in 2020, you're now doing that same type of retrace. It's almost perfectly a 382 Fibonacci retrace. So the amazing thing about it is you can say history is repeating. And if history does repeat, you're going to get this monster move to mirror the move as well. So you're looking at a potential target of 2,900 or so on gold, which would mirror this breakout here. And again, just look at how the similarities of the break above, the retrace, and here you broke above, retrace, and then you expect the same breakout. So in my opinion, it is just a picture perfect chart setup, and it meshes perfectly with the printing of money, the M2 money supply. Everyone thinks that the Fed will start tightening at some point. They will tighten a little bit, but they can't do that much or it'll wreck the economy. So gold, again, continues to be one of my favorite places to secure your dollars in.
As recent as September 2020, the 50-day moving average for silver was some $26, while the 200-day moving average was at about $19.50. There's roughly about $7.50 between the two. Today, there's only about roughly about 50 cents between the two, and the 50-day is going down while the 200-day is going up. Do you see the 50-day moving average going below the 200-day moving average, where we may see a death cross coming soon despite all the positive news for silver?
I'm not in that camp that believes that, mainly because when moving averages get closer and closer together, what it's telling you is that the volatility in that particular thing, in this case in silver, is getting tighter and tighter. And I actually think when you look at the bigger picture on silver, that bullish consolidation, it's telling you that it's getting energy. It's kind of sitting still. Like think of a marathon runner who is going to run a major marathon the next day. They don't run a marathon the night before a marathon, right? They usually take a break, they get energy in them, and then they can go out and make that big move. So I'm in the camp that I think silver will actually bust through that and make a bigger move up, completing the bullish pattern on the daily chart.
Yeah, and that coincides with the news where we saw a recent article from Seeking Alpha which said all demand segments except for ETFs, which store silver for investors, will use more this year, and including ETFs will buy far more than was typical before the pandemic. So, as a technical analysis, when you hear demand will be higher in all segments of silver, does this push up your short term outlook for the silver price?
I think it has to a little bit. I think, again, for me, it's the macro thought of just all these mega economies, the industrialized, all these countries, whether it's Europe and the European Union, the US, and all Japan, and even China to some extent. The amount of money that's just going in being printed, you have to look at that and say, okay, well, if A plus B, what does that equal? It equals C, and C is a higher price in denominations that are not in the currencies of the world. So those prices should continue up, and at least you could literally see silver. I think silver over the next couple of years could easily see 45, $50
Oh.
an ounce.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I agree with you there, but I mean, still the question remains: governments, industry, investors, they do have an increasing appetite for silver. Why are we not seeing silver gaining any traction on an upward movement, and we're still in that sideways to barely upward movement?
Well, I think the big thing here is that you have to look at the current inflation numbers. And I think the inflation numbers, if you look currently, and if you listen to the Federal Reserve, they say, oh, it's transitory. Oh, we're seeing inflation, but we're not seeing runaway inflation. And my concern, and what I think will be a driver for the metals in the second half of the year, is that as we start to hear from the Fed that, oh, wait a minute, this might not be as transitory as we thought, that's going to make investors say, okay, this could be a long-term issue of massive inflation. I mean, even inflation of 4 or 5% a year for many years is pretty problematic for currencies, but really good for metals. And I think that's why, I mean, right now the markets are trusting the Fed. The Fed has gotten us through this pandemic for the most part here in the United States. But I don't think personally that the Fed can just put the genie back in the bottle when the inflation starts to get going.
Yeah, Gareth, when that inflation does start going, I mean, what do you have any targets that you're looking at for silver and gold?
I mean, if Bitcoin would pull back, I would be a huge fan of Bitcoin as just a diversification. I also think that there will be certain, man, it's so hard because I mean, there will be many assets. I do think there are certain stocks that will benefit. One of my favorite areas to invest in is actually for a 3 to 5 year horizon is China right now. I'm looking at a China chart and I'm seeing that the Chinese stock market, the Shanghai Composite, has this beautiful pattern set up that is very similar, if not identical, to the chart of Bitcoin before Bitcoin ran from 10,000 to 60,000. And so if that chart is identical, then we can start to say, okay, well, there's a chance that the Shanghai Composite could make that type of meteoric run. In fact, let me just show you guys this. This is such a cool thing here. So I'm going to show you my screen again here, and you can see that this is your chart of Bitcoin prior to the big breakout, right? And you can see this wedge pattern, how you had the all-time high back in 2017, and then you had these subsequent pivots. And then what we ended up seeing on Bitcoin was this massive breakout. So there you see the wedge pattern again, and look at what Bitcoin did. Now with the Shanghai, I want to show this to you. It's so cool. Is look at that identical pattern. You had your basically all-time high going back multiple years, and then you have your second pivot, and we just tagged this third pivot on the Shanghai. And so what I'm watching for here is the potential for a move above this range, and that to kickstart a very similar move up where you could see literally, I mean, let's just take the previous high, which was 6,000. So if you look at Bitcoin's high, it was 20,000. We went to 60,000 approximately. So you could be looking at 18,000 on the Shanghai Composite over the next 2 to 3 years, maybe 5 years out. But in terms of investing, that's where I would start to look. I would look outside of the United States to other areas for the bigger move.
Great points. Another very familiar looking chart there.
Yeah.
Gareth, you did talk about SLVs a little bit earlier, so I want to ask, who has a stronger influence on the precious metals markets? Is it the paper markets with the ETFs, SLVs, or the physical market, counting industry and retail investors, such as a lot of us here, and why?
Yeah, that's a really good question because we've seen the rise of the retail investor in this last 12-month period with the meme stocks, and even there was a pump where it was done on silver and they tried to send silver to the moon. Didn't quite work out, and I think that answers our question where it tells us that the institutions, the market for silver is still big enough where smaller investors don't have enough control to really cause a surge on silver of epic proportions. So I would say institutions still control that market. My guess is they're accumulating and they will send it sharply higher in the future.
Okay, and I guess that leads us to this weekend where they are planning another movement, another, I don't want to use the word pump, but another movement where guys are going to start to take physical silver off of the market. And we just discussed what happened last time around. What do you think will happen this time around?
Well, so people that bought it last time, if you looked at the SLV or the chart of silver, it had this big move up for that one day, and then it kind of fell back down. Anytime investors get burned by doing something, and in this case, that one didn't work out, you usually see a situation where the next time they don't trust it as much. But I do like the chart a lot more now. I mean, it's a much stronger chart, and I'm thinking that maybe the institutions will help it. So let's see what happens. But it certainly looks good on the longer term and the midterm basis for this chart of silver.
Okay, Gareth Soloway, it's been a pleasure speaking with you once again, and I hope we can do this again soon.
Me too. It was truly a pleasure. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Thank you, Gareth. There you go. Both the news for silver and the candlesticks have some very positive things to say about the outlook for silver. As always, please leave your thoughts in the comment section below and remember to keep it liquid, keep it real, and I'll see you on the next episode of Metal Money.